Today's podcast is brought to you by Stealth Outdoors. The off-season's a great time to rehab your gear, so head on over to Stealth Outdoors at www.stealthoutdoors.com to pick up some climbing stick wraps, cam buckle covers, platform cable wraps, or stealth strip rolls for all of your miscellaneous silencing needs. Today's show is also made possible by Hunting Beast Gear, innovators in mobile hunting gear and the designers of the Beast Sticks and Beast Stand. Check out the latest products at www.huntingbeastgear.com. And now, on to the podcast.
All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Hunting Beast Report. I am your host, Scott Biskobing, alongside the Hunting Beast himself, Mr. Dan Infault. How's it going today, Dan?
I'm alive.
So predictable with that response every time. Yeah, a lot of stuff's been going on lately, though, with the public land stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we kind of missed talking about that a little bit last week, and we probably should have. But thankfully, there was one or two other guys out there that were spreading the word, and it was nice to see hunters as a group kind of bound together and make their voices heard. I think that's obviously made a difference. Mm-hmm. I mean, do you have any thoughts on everything that's going on? Do you feel good about things, or do you feel like this is just step one in that, and that we might be looking at something like this happening again?
Of course, I'm happy that people are voicing their opinions and that they're changing their minds. But there's a little bit of a thing in me that just thinks like, wish somebody would do something about what's going on here. It's like,
yeah.
We talked about it several times that are selling all the property around me,
right,
in Wisconsin, and nobody seems to, care. They keep it more hidden here, though. They don't say nothing, and
yeah.
All of a sudden, just you go hunting and your public property's gone. It's happened to me a few times.
You've actually spoken to people about it, right?
Oh yeah, I contacted my senators and congressmen and everybody, and nobody will do anything. As a matter of fact, Senator Johnson told me to pound sand, said he'd like to sell all the property, that it'd be more taxes for the state.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, it's one of those things where there's always an ulterior motive in all these kinds of things, and it's like you said with Ron Johnson there saying it's more tax money for the state. But then you also kind of wonder, is that fully what it's all about, or is there a bigger picture that we're not privy to?
He's representing the people, and people aren't voicing their opinions.
Right.
If he's not getting the message, I mean, look at he had a thing on his web page that said his stance on public land is to sell the less desirable land and only keep the beautiful properties. It said on his, and as soon as he got hammered about the federal land, that's missing from his website now.
Well, define the beautiful properties in whose eyes?
Right? Maybe his. But that's what it takes. I mean, he had a stance. He was probably part of wanting to sell that public property and gain more taxes and stuff if he's not a hunter. I don't think he realizes how many people in Wisconsin hunt that vote for him.
Right.
And that's what he needs to realize. And people won't send letters. People won't get off their butt. They think it's everybody else's job,
Yeah, much like the spring meetings and stuff.
Yep. Mm-hmm. You go to one of those, sad 5 people will be there from your county,
Right. Mm-hmm. Yep. But anyways, the real reason for tonight's show is we have a guest here waiting backstage that we're about to bring on, and that's none other than Mr. Andy May. Andy,
hey,
how are you tonight?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me.
Good. Yeah, we had a little issue with the sound there on your end. Hopefully everything sounds okay right now, or we can get through the show anyways.
Yeah, we can make it work.
So tonight's topic of conversation, and it's kind of been a little bit of maybe like a series that we've somewhat started here, and that was, we did it last week with Aaron Warburton and having our guests select 5 of their favorite buck kills. But but not just telling the story about it, but helping us understand the reasons why that kill was successful. Maybe why you picked that particular location in the first place. Just kind of some of those things that were leading up to it, and maybe dissecting, I guess, a little bit each particular hunt. We don't have to get into any super crazy details, like, you know, what socks you were wearing on that particular hunt, but unless you want to go down that route. But just kind of giving us a little bit of that backstory and some of those tips and tactics that were used for those. So with that said, are you ready to dive right into the first buck you selected here?
Yeah, I thought this was a great idea. No one's ever asked me that question before. Honestly, it was kind of hard to come up with my 5 favorites. It really was. I had a hard time, but it was interesting because it ended up being not necessarily my biggest bucks,
Right.
but it's the bucks that maybe it didn't seem like I was going to pull it off, or it was very tactical in nature. Like I felt like I accomplished more in the hunt as opposed to some of the other ones. Took a
Sure.
little more problem solving, a little more effort, that kind of thing. So it was kind of fun to think about. But I'm ready.
That's exactly what I was kind of looking for. I mean, it would be kind of crazy to say like buck number 3. You know, I just went to a tree and shot this one. You know, buddy told me to sit there. You know, maybe that's how the biggest one comes sometimes. But
Yeah.
for me, it's certainly not my biggest bucks are my favorites. There's certain ones that you know, that what you had to go through to get that animal is what makes it my favorite.
That's absolutely. That's exactly what I came up with too when I thought about these.
All right. Well, without any further ado, let's have you introduce buck number 1 here to us.
All right. Yeah, this is a really cool buck. He might be my favorite just because he's so unique. He's a big 6-point with a hook coming out of his base. Incredible mass, really cool frame. I knew about this buck the year before, but I was hunting some other deer. He didn't quite have my attention, like at least to go after him. But it was a deer that I knew I was going to pay attention to in the future. I just love unique deer, not necessarily high scoring deer. I like ones that have character, that are different. A lot of times, the ones that other people would, if they were on the Mander's farm or something, they would even look twice at. I like those, especially if they have weeds. So this buck was in a part of the country. It's in actually a part of Ohio that's really open, wide open, very small woodlots, little hedgerows, major cropping area and farming ground. They've been very aggressive with farming, eliminating any type of cover, and it's got really low deer density too. So it was a unique area, not an area that I typically like to hunt, only because it doesn't usually grow older deer. It doesn't set up well for deer to survive. Every little woodlot, every little hedgerow has a bow hunter in it, and then during gun season, they do drops from one little woodlot to the next, and they do a number of deer. So it's typically not an area where I find the shooter, but this deer somehow got, slipped through the cracks and got some mates on him. So the year I started targeting this deer, I noticed really quickly I had an area that I sort of had covered. I had a piece of public ground. Then it's a piece of permission ground about a mile away from that, like 52 acres or so. And then there was another piece of ground that I had permission on, and that one was like kind of one of those properties where anybody can hunt. So very pressured, but it was on a private piece. And all of these kind of were within a 3-mile triangle. And I started seeing this deer in the summer, like in the bean fields and stuff. And I noticed that I was always seeing him like out in the open. I wasn't seeing him come out of timber. I wasn't seeing him come out of like little drainages or hedgerows. He was always out in the open, like often on the edge of the corn. in teams. So I just started, you know, thinking about that. I was like, this deer is always in the open. So season opens, I kind of lost track of him. I'm some other deer in Michigan and kind of bouncing around. But I'm running cameras on all of these spots. And I ended up tagging deer in Michigan. So then I was like, okay, I'm going to focus on this deer. And basically every free moment I had, I was out kind of glassing for this deer. I was getting him pictures on him throughout the season on each of these cameras, but it was at night, very frequent, uh, nothing consistent. So my strategy basically was I'm going to work this open ground because it's roads every mile, every square mile there's a road. It's really good for glassing. The crops are up, the corn is up, so it's a little tricky. But I was routinely like catching this deer that first light or last light, like in the beans, and he was always like traveling the edge of corn, going into corn, where he'd be on one of those little field drainages, just those little dips where the runoff is. And I just quickly knew like this deer is like living out in the open. He is avoiding the woodlots at all costs. So that public piece, which had been good to me in the past, I never got a daylight picture of him, but I had pictures of him in there at night, nothing in daylight ever. So the other piece that was about a mile and a half, 2 miles away, and it kind of sounds weird that this deer is traveling this far, but this is how far the cover is from each other. It's like, it's a mile, a half mile, 2 miles to the next patch of cover. And these deer are very nomadic and they covered a lot of ground, mostly at night. That other piece, it had all kinds of hunters in it. And I was getting pictures in there and I found a lot of the sign in there too. So I was thinking I was going to kill him there, but I just had to like work through all the other guys and it was kind of a mess in there. And then we had this other spot, which is a permission piece, and me and one other guy have permission. It's a very small piece. He always hunts in the same tree. There's very little cover on the property. But what it does have that's unique is in the middle of this big open ag land, there's like almost like a cattail, little mini slopes, marsh in there. There's a little pond, and then it's got cattails and marsh grass kind of all around it. It's not big, less than 5 acres.
Okay.
So basically what I did for a couple of weeks is I'm bouncing around. I'm following, I'm getting a picture of them over here, so I'm hunting over there. Then I spot them over here, so I'm hunting over here the next day. And I'm just never laying eyes on this deer while I'm hunting. I see him sometimes glassing before work, and then I think I know where he's at, and then I go hunt there, and he shows up on a camera that night a mile away. And it's just like, holy cow, what is this deer doing? How is he getting to all these places? So then I started looking in between, and there's like kind of like checkerboard, beans, corn, hedgerow, little drainage. And I was like, man, I think he's using just the open ground and just staying, just below eye level down in those drainages, or he's in the corner. So I started knocking on some doors all through there, asking permission, and I got a couple of pieces on parcels that like didn't even have a single tree. They're like, "You want to hunt our field?" And I said, "Yeah, if you don't mind. Like, do you mind if I scout it? Can I open it if I see something?" And they were like, "Sure." So I started walking these edges and I started cutting tracks like along the corn. Basically, if it had an edge of corn or a little drainage or a hedgerow, I was just scouting and just trying to cut a big track. And I started finding tracks that I believed were his. And it started I never really figured it out, but I kind of like saw how the steer is moving through the country. And it was always in or along corn or those drainages. I think he was getting down in them, like below the ground and working through fields like that. So it's really interesting, really unique. I had never had a deer that I know of that was doing that regularly. So I remember talking to Mark Penning about this, and I was basically bouncing around. My thought was like, okay, I'm going to keep bouncing around, hunting him inside the corn here where he's traveled. Okay, I'm going to go hunt on this public piece over here and hunt on this private piece. And I just kept missing him. And then finally, I was just like, all right, where is this deer? Do I think he's going through the most? And I came up with two areas. And one was there was a big cornfield it was cornfield and beans, and I cut several of his tracks going along there. So I was like, okay, maybe I can slip in that corn and kind of hunt the edge. But I thought that would be rather risky and kind of difficult. Like you'd have very little visibility, and you're expecting him to come down the edge, and it's just a difficult hunt. So I ended up focusing on that area that I mentioned before on that private piece I had permission, where that pond was in that little swamp, because there was a little like grove area just adjacent to that, just off the side of that had some locust trees, and it had some branches that were hanging down, and there were scrapes under there. And I did get him a couple times on the scrape, but it had been like infrequent. It was like, just after dark, middle of the night, one time in daylight, and then a week and a half later, it would be in daylight. So it's like, this was the spot where I felt like, okay, if I plant my butt here and I put in time, maybe I'm going to crack them. And it took me back to like Bobby Worthington's style of rut hunting. And he tries to find, when he's zeroing in on a buck, he tries to find the tree that he thinks that deer is going to buy the most. And he's willing to sit day after day after day after day until that buck comes by. And that's totally not my style. Like, I can do that, but for only so long. I just get a little bored with it.
Yeah.
But this was the only deer that I was really interested in. It's not often in Michigan or where I hunt in Ohio usually that there's a buck that I want so much that I'm willing to do something that I don't really want to do. There's usually not one that sets himself apart with age or with rack size. I mean, when there is, I focus on the deer 100%. But a lot of years there isn't. But this one was so unique. I was like, I didn't have another 3-year-old that I knew about in that whole area. So,
it's definitely unique for sure.
Whatsoever.
Very unique.
Yeah. So finally, I was like, all right, I'm going to sit here every time I have a south wind, because I did need something out the south. I'm going to sit here, and everybody knows my schedule. It's kind of wonky. I don't get a ton of time, but I was hunting like a few hours before work, coming right after work and hunting. And, if I had a weekend and we had stuff going on, I was going sitting there midday. It didn't take me long. It took me 3 or 4 sits, but I ended up camping out there and just being patient. And it was November 6th. I'll never forget it. So I slipped in there in the evening. It was 5 o'clock or so, afternoon. I was going to sit till the evening, and it's already starting to get dark. I haven't seen a single deer. And then all of a sudden, I hear something like running my way out of that marsh grass. And here comes the doe. I'm hunting so the setup is kind of unique too. I've talked about this. Sometimes I hunt really low out of the saddle. I didn't want to get up high in the tree, trim, make a bunch of racket. I wanted to slip into the spot and slip out. And I would have had done so much trimming. I just don't like to do that, especially like if I think a deer could be bedded nearby, or this is an area that he's going to come through potentially when I'm not there. I don't really want to do that, even on private, like during the season. I just don't want to change anything. So often in those types of scenarios, I'll hunt low, like out of tree stand and get behind the tree. So I was kind of off where I expect the deer to come through or travel, but I'm set up behind this big tree, kind of using it as a blind, so to speak. Anyway, my feet are. I got my platform this far off the ground, so I'm literally at ground level, so I can kind of see under the canopy. And I hear this deer coming, and it's a doe, and she comes right out into that little grove where those scrapes were. and she stops and she looks back, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, and it could have been anybody, but I just had this feeling, and so I come to full draw because it's one of those things like I'm at ground level, like I need to be at full draw. I don't want to be trying to make a drawing movement with a
Right.
big curve up like that at 20 yards. I know better. I've tried to do that, and it doesn't work out well. So I draw back, and I'm like, I can always let down if it's not my target buck. So I draw back, and I'm holding. As I'm holding, I hear something coming, and then I hear this loudest, deepest drum on out, like just like just like he's just exhaling all his energy out.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's him. Like it's him. Like that low, that pitch. And he steps out. He's got a really white rack. He steps out. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm holding, you know, and I'm shaking. Like I've killed quite a few deer. I still shake like a leaf. And I had to like calm myself. And I'm like, all right, just relax, just relax. And he slowly walked, and he kind of walks over to the scrape, and he starts putting his head up. And I've got my pin right behind the shoulder. Just made perfect release, smoked him right through both lungs. He took off. He took off towards the neighbor's private ground there, but he didn't even make. He made probably 60 yards piled up. But that deer was just. It was driving me nuts because he was such a unique deer in the way he looked, but more so in the way he was acting, where he was living. And I hadn't encountered that before. And I hunted open ground. You know, I can usually pick out where deer are bedding, but this deer was like bedding in the corn, and were spots where you would look at a map and you wouldn't be able to pick it out. So I was really thrown for a loop with this buck, but I learned a lot. So he's definitely right up there with one of my favorites.
That is an awesome buck. You know, that open terrain, I always you always notice that they like seem to have a bigger range. It's like they cover a lot more area. But I think part of what it is they got like the unique bedding situations are more spread out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People always talk about how big bucks and big woods are so nomadic and they're so far, you know, they go for miles. And I really don't see that. They're usually like in a small area, it's just harder to see, you know. But the ones in the open terrain seem to really travel. I've seen that too, where, you know, you can be almost like 2 miles from where you originally seen it and you get on them, you know?
Yeah. It's the same thing I've experienced in like Nebraska and Kansas. I think it's when there's a lower deer density and the cover is spread out. I mean, they're still social animals. They still want to know what the does are doing. And, you know, with the does being all spread out, it's like they're just following their instincts. But it does set up a unique challenge. You would think it would be almost easier because it's like, you know, okay, they're moving more, but it's like, I don't know, they just use that cover that's available so well. It's really tricky, especially when you get a situation like that where the pressure's high and every little woodlot and every hedgerow has people in. It was tricky. It's one of my favorites because it didn't feel like it was gonna happen, and it did. So that's why it's right up there.
Yeah, very cool hunt.
Andy, we have a question here from Steve, and he's asking, how old was this buck? Did you age him?
I didn't age him. I'm sure he was. I would guess 5 years old. I wouldn't guess any older than that, only because of that area.
Sure.
The year before, I had a few pictures of him, and I thought he was a 4-year-old. He was probably like maybe like 126 points. So he was real impressive the year before. But he ended up. Another unique thing about this deer was I ended up finding his. He had broken off a really long brow tine, and I ended up finding it. So I had it repaired on there, but which was really cool. So with that brow tine, I think he was like 146 inches.
Wow.
Yep.
He looks like a smaller bodied deer. Like he's got a huge chest, but he's not very long. Is that perception, or is that because the rack is throwing me off?
Kind of looks like it might be on an angle a little bit.
he's at an angle a little bit. The frame on him is quite large. It could be that. I don't know. I didn't weigh him. You know, just going off a guess, maybe, it was November 6th. He was, starting to slim down a little bit. I'm sure he'd been mutton pretty good. Be 180, 190 pounds.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Just checking to see if we had any other questions on that one, and then we'll go ahead and move on to buck number 2 here. Yeah. Another unique buck.
Yeah. And
Very
this one
unique.
is like, not anywhere close to being one of my biggest, but like, gosh, it was such a cool hunt and very strategic. And what's neat about this deer is like I had no idea about this deer. This was an area I had never hunted, and it sort of goes hand in hand with another buck we'll talk about later that I had killed prior, but I ran into a similar situation that I think helped. So I ended up coming to this piece, and I'm looking at the map. I had scouted it before, but I had no idea that this buck was around or what kind of deer were on this piece of ground. So I knew there's on the back side of this, there's a river, and then off the bank there's a flat there, and in that flat there's a nice opening in the timber, and there's 4 or 5 good oak trees in there. And my plan was to circle around, kind of get the wind, kind of put the wind in my face, get in there and check for sign. So I kind of slipped in there. The wind is blowing at a decent clip. I like to still hunt a lot. Like I'm scouting with my bow in my hand. I'm glassing. I'm moving. I'm trying to scout. I'm trying to glass. Maybe trying to spot something. Trying to look for sign. I just like to. It's like I'm hunting and scouting at the same time. I'm just ready to set up when I find what I want. Or like if I bump a deer, it's like, okay, game out. Now I know this deer's in here. So I was kind of like in that mode, kind of scouting / hunting. But I circle around to where these oaks are, and I slipped in there, and there's like it's pouring up in there. There's scrapes everywhere. This is late October. Like this is like 3rd week of October, not that late. And these scrapes are opened up. There's some acorns on the ground. I'm like, oh man, there's buck in here. So I go and check one of the scrapes. There's a track in it. It's like, decent sized track. I was like, this is a good buck, I think. Didn't know what he has for headgear at all. So like normally I find that sign, it's kind of adjacent to some good cover. I'm like, maybe that's a good spot to set up. But from past experience, I know that little openings in the woods. So this was surrounded by timber, and there's a little opening with these 4 or 5 oaks in there. And we're going to talk about a buck later, a big wide one that I killed that I tried hunting a similar spot for this. And every time I hunted it, he busted me because the wind was coming over the top, swirling in that opening. Even though the sign and everything told me to be there, I was getting busted. So I remembered that. So I was like, no, I'm not going to hunt this little opening. Plus, the way the wind was blowing, it wasn't blowing to where I thought, there could be deer bedding, but it was a little in that direction too much, so I wasn't comfortable. So I said, all right, I'm going to back out. So I back out. I get all the way to the edge of the property. I bring up my Spartan Forge map, and I'm looking. And in front of the property, it's kind of the middle of the property. There's a thicket. And the thicket is, I don't know, maybe 10 acres, 15 acres. And it's got tall grasses in there, all kinds of bushy trees. There's some aspens in there, some various trees. But it's very thick. It's the thickest part of this whole property. And I'm looking at that. I was like, that sign was fresh. There's a fresh trap in there. That's the only logical area that I could make where this buck potentially could be better. Mm-hmm. So then I always say, look for the structure within the structure. Like you find, you're looking at big view aerial and you find the area, you're like, okay, I think the deer could be better than here. And in that scenario, I'm looking for the structure inside the structure. So inside that thicket, there's like a dense pocket of cover, like trees, bush and shrubs. Like that's the structure within the structure. So I literally dropped a pin on that. And I said, I think if he's in there, that's probably where he's at. And that's just from experience, like me hunting cedar swamps. It's like, how do you hunt a cedar swamp? Like, where do the bucks bed? Because it all looks good in there. But what I find is the big buck will often bed like in the structure within the structure where there's a dense pocket of cedars. So that's what I was going off of. So I circled around. Took a big loop around, and I got to the edge of this dense pocket where I think this deer might be bedded is roughly 80 to 100 yards away. So I go into this thicket. So now I'm in the security cover. Like I'm off the overgrown grassy field. I'm through the tree line. I'm in the security cover where the grass is high, and I'm slipping through there. And I'm trying to pick out a tree, and I find a tree, and the wind is blowing. He's here, and the wind is blowing like this. Okay, I'm like, all right. Now I'm not expecting him to come to me. I'm expecting him to go towards the oak trees. So what I do in this hunt is I do it because of that. I believe this deer is going to naturally travel away from me. I'm kind of on the backside. But what I have going for me is I'm in that thicket. I got in that thicket without bumping him. And I believe he would feel safe, in that thicket. So anyway, I get up, I find a tree, I start climbing the tree. I go to do my belt around and I accidentally like hit a branch. It doesn't make like a metal clang, but it makes a little noise. And I'm like, God damn. So I get everything situated. I step up onto the platform and I peek around the tree, and there's a doe that's bedded probably 25 yards away, and she's walking towards me, and she's looking. So she was bedded 25 yards away, heard that little noise I made, and she's looking. And I'm just frozen behind the tree, and I'm like, oh my God, like this is gonna blow the whole thing. She loses interest. She turned around. She dismisses it as nothing. She goes right back and lays down. And this is a very good situation now. So I can't see her. I'm thinking I'm gonna just see how things pan out this hunt. So it's getting to be, the sun's starting to come down a little bit, and I'm thinking, okay, this deer is not gonna come over here naturally. I don't believe so. I think he's gonna head towards those oaks and where those straights are. So I said, I'm gonna try to call. And so what I do here, and I did this very purposefully, and it's not like I thought this was going to work out. It just like at the moment, it made sense to me. So I've talked about this on another podcast because it was really cool how it worked out. I'm in the security cover, right? So I'm calling from in the cover that he's already in, which is a really good thing for me. Really high likelihood that this deer would respond to a call. Whenever I call, my best luck is when I'm in an area where I've gotten into an area where that deer isn't expecting me and where he feels safe. And where he feels safe, maybe coming to investigate. Now, if I was on the field edge, across, overgrown field, I'd really expect a big mature buck to come out and investigate that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if we could get downwind and some security cover, but this was a scenario where I felt like this could work, and I felt like I had to try it because I said, I felt like the deer was going to work away from me naturally. So what I did was I grabbed my gun call and I turned away. And I turned away because I was attempting to cast to the call. I wanted to sound a little bit further away than what I was. And you've heard the turkey on ridge, right? So this turkey can turn and face you and gobble, and it sounds like it's right there. And then it turns the other way and gobbles, and you could swear it's on the next ridge over.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was doing. I was trying to cast that call in a direction where he thought I was a little bit further away, hoping he would maybe respond and get within bow range. So I blew a little grunt. No response, nothing. And I didn't really expect anything. So I wait about 15 minutes. Then I take, I got a little, some wrapping antlers that I had with me, and I just get in the branches. This is about 15 minutes after I called with the grunt tube, and I just start clanking on the branches, just very light, just like a mid-October buck would do. You know, he's making a scrape, he's tickling the antlers,
Exactly.
tickling the branches with his antlers. Nothing aggressive. And then I put him away. And I was like, that's it. I'm not doing anything else. If he's interested, if he heard that and he's interested, he'll come. So I wait, and then all of a sudden I hear some steps, and it's wet in there. Like there's some wet spots. And I think he was on that little hump where that dense pocket was. It's a little bit of high ground and there's some trees or some bush shrubs. And I hear water. Like, and I'm like, okay, there's a deer in there, and he's kind of working this way. Then all of a sudden, I hear antlers tickling in the branches, and I can see like leaves shuddering and stuff. And I'm like, I think this buck's coming. And remember, I told you that the wind was kind of blowing like this.
Right.
Right? He's over here. He starts making a half moon to get the wind in favor. But because I called this way, I believe that he thought I was further away and like kind of over a little. And when he went to cut that corner of the wind, he didn't quite hit me. He got downwind to where he thought that call came from. That's what I really
But
think.
cut short of it. Yeah.
Just short. My wind is just. And all of a sudden I hear the steps getting closer and closer, and I look and I see a rack, and I put the binoculars up and I just see like, you know, pretty nice side and then this really odd side. I'm like, holy crap, that's a cool buck. And I'm like, I'm shooting that deer. Like I'm not looking at anything else. Like I'm shooting that deer. So he steps out. I actually got this on video. I've posted it before. But he steps out of the thicket and he comes, and it's like he's looking for that deer made a sound. But he just missed my wind. The wind is coming like this. He comes downwind, just misses me, and then he turns and he's going like kind of paralleling me and kind of circling back up towards where those oaks were. He ended up at 25 yards. I was able to draw back and shoot him. He only went like 15 yards and died. But just an awesome hunt, because like we don't get a lot of non-typicals in Michigan. So to shoot something like that, and she was probably injured, you know, the year before, maybe early in his, you know, in his pedicle or whatever. But to get one that was unique like that was really cool. And then just to go in blind and then have the amount of thought that I put onto that or into that hunt, and like the tactic I used and it worked was pretty special.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, when I look at that hunt, when I'm listening to you talk about it, I'm thinking about hunts that I've been on. You know, most of the time something goes wrong in that. That's one where everything went perfect. But over the years, you know, doing those hunts, you get to a point where a guy like you or I, and this is the hard part that it's so hard to explain to somebody who's new to hunting or new to big bucks, is that after you've done this for a few years, you look at a woods and you kind of know where that deer is going to come from. I mean, almost to the spot. And you're trying to figure out a way to get in there. And I was thinking about that while you were talking about that. I think that's where a lot of other people drop the ball. And that's what that little piece of information there is why you succeed. And I look for the same thing, the cover within the cover. Only I've never quite heard it described like that. That's a good way to describe it. Yeah. But you know, like I've always struggled with ways to describe that, like the lone tree and the cattails or whatever, or the little bush spot. You know, you can bet anywhere in the cattails, but that's where they're going to be, kind of thing. You know,
right?
Very cool hunt.
Yeah, it. You know, like a younger Andy would have hunted where those oaks were and where the scrapes were. You know, and I probably would have got picked off, you know, with as it got toward dark and the thermal's going down and everything. I don't think that setup would have worked at all. And I don't know that he would have came out there in daylight anyway. I mean, this was on public ground.
Right.
So yeah, it was neat. It was a neat hunt, and just the way, yeah, it's not often in Michigan that calling works. And I don't think this deer. I'm not trying to say this deer was a super old deer. I think he was a 3-year-old deer, to be honest with you.
Really?
I think so. Yeah. He had a good sized body, but he struck me as like a 3-year-old deer, like a good 3-year-old, like the goofy side. But
Yeah, I bet your average guy would have, even if he knew where the deer was, he would have tried to push his luck and being just off wind and slip in there, and eventually that wind swirls once and you're done.
yeah, 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 and that's where all the sign was too. It's like 9 times out of 10, that's probably where I would hunt. But I just knew from past experiences, those little openings in the woods can be tough, man. They, especially when you try to get right on the edge of the opening and you're trying to shoot into it. Those tight ones. Now, if it's big enough and you can get off to one side, you know, then that wind will come over the top of the trees and then circle, and it kind of misses you. But on those small ones that are only 2 acres, you know, maybe 1.5 acres, it's really hard to get away, especially when there's foliage too on the tree. Because if it had been like say a north wind and all the leaves were down, maybe I get some consistency blowing through, you know, the trees. Perhaps I could get away with it. But when there's leaves like it was in mid-October, I mean, it's coming over the top and just swirling right back in. And you'll see that happens to me on another buck that we're going to talk about later. But I just used that past experience where I got my buck kicked in a similar situation. It was, I'm going to press it here because I already pressed it with another deer and he busted me for 2 years. So.
Yeah, it's always interesting, you know, just going back to the buck itself and how it probably had an injury there. It's always interesting to me, though, that more often than not, if you take one side versus the other, regardless of the fact that it's you know, deformed or whatever you want to call it, that the same amount of inches are probably just about there, you know, from one side to the next. They still are going to grow, you know, that they wanted to grow symmetrical, but yet they weren't able to because of whatever the injury was or whatever was going on. But if you look at it, it was pretty close on both sides. If you know,
yeah, in Michigan too, like so many of our older deer end up being 8 points, you know, 120, 130, 8 points. It's just because like we got so many hunters, all of our good genetic deer killed young. So like if there's a 10 point out there, like people lose their minds. So, you know, a lot of times like the big mature deer that I find is a clean 8, you know, it's 130 inches or whatever. So when I saw that, he probably wanted to be a clean 8, but when I saw that goofy side, like I almost like that better sometimes. It's just more character.
Yeah, so much character.
I mean, I would prefer a buck like that. I always love the character, you know.
Yeah. Real quick here, we got a question for you, Andy. Is your hunting mainly farm country, hardwood hills, swamps, or a variety of all of it? Or do you have a preference?
I hunt pretty much everything. So in Michigan, it's a mix of some farm, not a whole lot of farm. I mean, there's farming kind of everywhere in southern Michigan, but like a lot of times I'm hunting like a marsh, a swamp, a creek or river bottom. You know, all of those are kind of within farm ground, I guess. I mean, there's farm ground everywhere. Not a whole lot of big woods down here. What's not what we would call big woods compared to other parts of the country, I guess. But that's kind of what I hunt here in Michigan. I tend to find the older bucks in swamps, marshes, in farm ground. It'll always be around like areas that have standing corn or next to like maybe a big private piece where you know, we have limited hunters or something like that. That's usually where I end up, kind of hunting those types of areas. I don't hunt a lot of real open ground down here in southern Michigan. It's just there's not a lot of like open ground that isn't farmed. So there's not a lot. It's not like Nebraska or like in Kansas where you might get some big CRV fields or anything like that. Um, but I travel a lot. I travel all over the place. So I hunt hill country. I love the Western Plains. I try to diversify and hunt different things just because it's fun for me and it's new and I'm like not real good at it, but I learn, so it's like kind of like a kid became like when I first started deer hunting in Michigan, it was so exciting because everything was new and challenging. It's like, okay, now I'm kind of doing all right in Michigan. I want to travel some other areas and try some new stuff. And I get into some new country and it's just like I'm back to square one kind of learning and I like that.
What's interesting too is when you learn something like say in Nebraska where it's wide open as you're talking about, you come back to Michigan with a different perspective. And even though it's not wide open in Michigan, all of a sudden you start to understand why a certain deer did a certain thing. And it really, it broadens your horizons everywhere you hunt. People don't realize that, but you learn how to hunt hill country and it helps you in flatland. It helps you understand why deer are at littler elevations and stuff. So that traveling all over the place, I think, probably has been an asset that's helped you. Would I be correct there?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And another thing that's probably worth mentioning is like I like hunting other species too. Like I can see some mule deer back here and I love hunting antelope. I go out there because the new challenge, and I love hunting spot and stalk. So I'm very, very comfortable on the ground. I've done well with mule deer, I've done well with antelope. And those are some of the hardest deer to hunt, like spot and stalk, especially antelope. It's like you're trying to spot and stalk an antelope on a golf course. I mean, it's like there's hardly any cover. So you learn to use like the little undulations and what little cover is there, and you're low and you're below. You're trying to stay below eye level. Well, I go out there and I fail and I fail and I fail, and then I get one. It's like all of a sudden I'm starting to feel very confident on the ground. Now, maybe Michigan doesn't set up well for glassing and spot stalk, but like all of a sudden it's like this whole ground attack thing is something for one, I love. I like to do it. Two, it's challenging. But now I'm like super confident on the ground. Like I feel like if I can see a deer before it sees me, and there's some sort of condition that's in my favor, maybe it's a little damp, maybe there's a little breeze, maybe I'm in an area where I can move quiet and keep an eye on him. They're going to talk about a deer where I find him exclusively from the ground because of where he's at. But I feel very confident on the ground now. I don't feel like I'm at a deficit. I feel like it's an advantage to me in certain situations. So that's why I often will hunt from the ground depending on where I'm at. So it definitely you pull some things from different areas of different species, then you come back to whitetail. It kind of like opens a whole new book, whole new challenge that you can capitalize on if you commit to it for a little bit.
Sure.
How do you train as an archer, as a bow hunter, and that for that type of terrain? In the off season, is there something special you're doing in terms of shooting and things like that?
That could be a whole podcast. Yeah, I take that very serious. I do all my training, physical, and I call it archery training because that's how I feel I practice. I'm training for something. But I gear that all towards the Western hunts that I do.
Sure.
Because the Western hunts, I'm often having longer shots. So I need to be able to shoot longer distances. I need to be able to know what my bow does in the wind. I need to be able to know what I can get away with in a windy condition archery shot. I need a arrow that's super forgiving. I need one that's not going to drift much. So broadheads come into play, flexing comes into play. All my shots out west are never they're never flat footed like I shoot in the backyard. They're on my knees. They're on my butt. They're on half kneel. They're on uneven ground with 1 foot up, 1 foot down. You know, these things are, these shots are technical. You start changing stuff like that, your balance, like your accuracy can go way down. It can change dramatically. A lot of angles, you know, so you have to cut garbage. So yeah, I do when I'm doing archery training, and I say archery training because there's archery practice where I'm working on form, repeatability, muscle memory. There's archery testing where I'm testing like this arrow setup versus this arrow setup, this base configuration versus this base configuration. I've been doing it all week. But then when I settle in on something for a hunt, then to go to like what I call training, and that's realistic shots. I don't have flat-footed shots out west. Even deer hunting, like I'm not shooting standing up flat at 20 yards like this and killing my deer. I'm on the ground, I'm hunched over, I'm 20 feet up in a tree stand shooting like this, or I'm in a tree saddle, you know, shooting like this. Those are the shots that I encounter. So why am I not practicing those shots?
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of hunters screw up in the moment of truth because your balance is compromised, your form is compromised, you got adrenaline going.
Yeah.
A lot of guys go out west and they have no idea the technical shots that you're going to get. And if you just go out there and like, oh, I'm going to shoot a mule deer in high country, but I'm practicing my backyard at 30 yards, man, you're basically potentially going to have the most difficult shot of your life on uneven ground with a crosswind, and you have to cut garbage. You know, that stuff takes practice. So my training, and I know that sounds weird. This is like, okay, we're deer hunters. Like, well, it's not training. That's just the way my brain works. I think of it as I'm training for something. This is something I want to be good at, something I want to be better at. So I think of it as training. So yeah, I prepare very much, very extensively for those hunts and whitetail hunts too. But because I do that and I'm practicing those realistic scenarios, it transfers well over to whitetail. I make sure I practice out of the tree, elevated, like I said, you know, angled shots. I didn't used to do that as much, and then I found myself, you know, missing deer, wounding deer, not really shooting as good as I would in my backyard, standing on flat ground at 25 yards. So just like an MMA fighter training for his fight, he's going to be training with someone that's as skilled as him and working on difficult combinations and different types of mixed martial arts. I think of it as the same way, except with bow hunting. You know, trying to be skillful in a lot of different ways, a lot of different positions, a lot of different types of terrain. So I just look at it that way. And I don't know why, but it gives me sort of like a goal in life or a direction, you know, something that like, if I keep working at this, I continue to get better. And I like that. I mean, it keeps me focused. It's a positive thing in my life. So yeah, I do take it pretty serious.
Very good. Well, I didn't expect to open up a can of worms like that, but like you said, you probably spent a whole lot of time talking about that. But real quick here, let's move on here to buck number 3.
Okay.
Bring this guy up here.
Yeah. Yeah. So this was really cool. Buck. And he is, I mean, if you saw my deer, he's probably somewhere in the middle, like score wise.
Okay.
He's an awesome deer. But you know, you're hunting anywhere where there's big deer. This might be a deer you pass. I mean, who knows? But this deer, the year before, I got pictures of him, and he was just a tight racked, really heavy. He had a big old noggin on him, big body, big blocky body. And I was like, gosh, that deer is old. And I sent a picture to my buddy Skip Sly out in Iowa. He's from Michigan originally, and he knows old deer. Like he hunts 8, 9-year-old deer on his farm in Iowa. I said, is it deer like really old? And he just says minimum 6. So I was like, God, but he just wasn't one I was interested in because he was probably 110 inches then the year before. But I was like, I kind of hope he's around. Like it's not too often I get old deer like that. So anyway, I hunt some other deer, have some success. The following year, I put some cameras out, and this deer's kind of on the radar a little bit. I was like, I want to look at him. I want to see him. And I get a picture of him, and I know it's him right away because the deer's year before his brow tines went out, but they went back. So kind of unique.
Okay.
They would angle way back. And I had this really cool picture of him at night, and he had like this heart-shaped rack, and his brow tines went back and splayed out like that. And I sent a picture to my buddy Luke. You remember Dan? You remember Moon Dude from
Oh yeah.
the Beast? He's one of my best buddies. I sent a picture to him. He goes, what in the Batman is that? Because it looks like a Batman symbol,
Yeah.
And I've never named a deer in my life, and I was like, Batman, So it did. It looked like a Batman symbol when you looked at it head on. So anyway, I was like, I'm gonna target this deer. I'm gonna try to hunt him. So there were some other deer I was hunting too. It wasn't like one I was gonna devote the whole season to, but it was like, okay. So I ended up tagging another deer, and then I'm like, all right, I'm gonna focus on this deer for a while. And this deer also lived in an area that was relatively wide open, similar to the first buck we talked about, like that type of ground. It was not as open, but pretty open. And I had so I had permission on. This is a really unique scenario. There's a piece of public ground that's very small, has good cover. There's a private ag field next to that. On the back side of that is a hedgerow. I had permission to hunt the hedgerow. And then there was a field on the other side of the hedgerow that was just an open field. And I had permission to hunt that. So I had permission, like, in this little corner of this square mile, except for the one big ag field. So I knew that deer was not bedding on the public because I know this public ground, it's super small. Yes, deer kind of travel through it sometimes. It doesn't get a lot of hunting pressure because it's small and there's just not much to it. But I knew that deer was, that's where I had gotten pictures of them, and so I know he's in this area. And sometimes, like when I see deer in this area, like I've had luck, like trying to ask permission, like, hey, I saw a deer in your field. Do you mind if I hunt your field for today? A field where there's no trees or anything. So sometimes I can work that. So I'm trying to like really narrow down this buck. So I'm on this public piece. I'm right on the edge. And this was one of those scenarios where I did not want to be in a tree. I didn't want to be stationary where I could only see a certain amount. So what I did was I kept working the edge of that public. Basically, there's two sides that I could work. And I'm blasting out of this open stuff because I knew he wasn't bedded in there. So he had to be, if he was in the area, he was going to be bedded out in the open. There was beans, there was some corn, there's a little drainage ditch with some bushy trees along it. Sometimes I've seen bucks get out under those bushy trees. And then there's that hedgerow, and I've seen deer in that hedgerow. So I'm kind of working that the first time I go out there, and I see a deer stand up out of the beans. And it's the weirdest spot, Dan. It was like there's standing corn, and there's beans, and then where the beans ends, there's plowed dirt all the way to the next row. And I see this doe stand up right out of the beans, like in the wide open, not in the corner, not in hedgerow, right in between the two. In the field, I can't hunt. And a doe stands up. I'm like, that's weird. So then I'm kind of glassing out there, and then another deer stands up, and it's a buck, and it's like the 100-inch buck. And I'm like, this is like, we're getting like late October here. So I'm kind of watching. I'm watching the edge. I'm kind of working down up and down the edge, trying to get different angles and stuff. And then I see more deer stand up. And then all of a sudden I see this nice buck stand up, and I'm like, oh my God, that's Batman. And they're all out there. There's like 4 or 5 bucks. There's probably 5 or 6 does, and they're just out in the open. And the more I learn about this particular area, it's the same type of deal. They feel safe out in the open. They don't feel safe in the woods. They don't feel safe even in the hedgerows sometimes. But that one hedgerow, I knew nobody hunted that one. I had permission on. So I watch these deer. They start kind of jockeying around, and they go this way towards the hedgerow. I can get over there, but I'm watching them. Like they start to move this way, and I'm kind of shadowing them. They're 300 yards out, and I'm just kind of shadowing them this way. It gets dark, and so I'm back out there the next day looking for them. Same thing, kind of set up looking. Deer start standing up. I don't see them. I'm like, all right. So I don't remember exactly how many days I got to hunt that week, but like I was hunting every so often. Every other time I went out there, I was seeing this deer. Like half the time I'd see him, half the time I didn't know where he was. But he was always out in the open. He was always like in those bushy trees, right along the edge of the corn, along that drainage, or he was out in the middle of the beans, or I'd see him pop out of that hedgerow. But he was always kind of in that area where I couldn't hunt. But I'm just like, a lot of times they start to move. The does and stuff eventually will often move my direction. So I'm like, it's just a matter of time before they get off. It's getting late in October, now into like early November. Like I'm going to be able to cut these deer off. So my plan is keep a visual. When they start moving towards me, I'm going to move with them and cut them off and try to get a shot at this deer. And that was the game plan. It's like always stay on the ground so I can stay mobile because the situation called for that. I didn't want to be up in a tree and have him out there and he starts coming this way and I have to scurry down the tree and try to get over there. It's like that was my best chance. And I must have seen this deer 5 or 6 times and just always, he's always out there. The last time that before I had the first encounter, they were out there, and as the sun started setting, and these does start working their way towards me, and the wind is like blowing, not directly to them, but it's blowing at an angle, and they're kind of working towards that angle, and I'm working down the piece of that public, and I'm like, it's like threading a needle, and eventually they get so close where the does were in the front, him, a couple other bucks were in the back, and my wind catches that seed doe. She busts, runs off, and takes these other deer with her. The thing that worked in my favor is these other deer had no idea what went on. They don't know if she saw something. She is the only one that smelled me, so I felt like I was kind of still alive in the sun. So there was a between that public and that crop field that I couldn't hunt, there was a little buffer of like just tall grass. And I've had good luck with decoys in the past. I don't use them often, but I use them. I use them in this type of scenario where we can open ground. A lot of times I'll be carrying one. I've talked with Jared Scheffler a lot about it, and just certain scenarios I like having it with me. I may not even use it, but I like to have it in that open ground scenario where I'm moving. So I had the heads up decoy. I made a little post for it, and I get set up. I was like, you know what? This isn't working. I'm going to set up the decoy. We're getting into November now. I'm hoping he'll see this decoy, and he'll come over to where I can shoot him. So I set him up in that tall grass. The heads up decoy is like shoulder up to the head with antlers, and it's very realistic, except it only has that portion. It's not full body decoy. So it works really well, like in tall grass where like the body would be hidden. So I stick it in there, maybe about 15 yards onto the public piece. And I'm kind of off to the side. I got the wind in my favor, and I'm just hoping that this deer pops up and sees this. It's got a really white rag, a decoy does, so it's very visible. And as I'm sitting there, like these clouds are forming, and I'm like, man, that looks pretty bad. So I get on my phone and I look at the radar, and it's like all pink, like snow. And this is like early November, and I'm like, what the heck? And it's just a small cell, and it says winds up to 40 miles an hour and heavy snowfall for like 20 minutes. So all of a sudden, it just starts blowing, and there was snow, and it was snowing as hard as I've ever seen it snow in my life. Like all of a sudden, like I could see across that field. Now I can't see 20 yards into the field. So I'm like looking at the thing. I'm like, this is gonna blow over. So I'm just kind of sitting there, and I remember looking at my bow. Like I had this thing that it sets on so it could stand on the ground. And I remember looking at my bow sight, and it was like covered in snow. And I look at my arrow, and it has, an inch of snow down the whole thing. I mean, that's how hard it was coming down. And I just remember looking at that, and I was like hunkered down, trying to stay dry. And then all of a sudden, I like pick my head up, and I look, and this buck is standing 15 yards from my decoy. And I'm like, oh my God, I didn't, he's looking at the decoy, he's locked in, and I, had a mild panic attack. So I like grab the bow, and I have to guess. I know the decoy is roughly, 18 yards away. He's probably another 15 beyond it. And he's walking, and he's coming to circle downwind. So I draw back, and he's still in the field where I can't hunt. So I'm literally waiting for him to step across. He steps into the grass, and I have to kind of guess the range a little bit. But I knew he was like low 30s. I shoot, and my arrow literally, it's going at him, and it just dives, and it's right between his feet.
From all the snow on it and that?
Yeah, the snow just takes it and just knocked it right down into the dirt.
Sure.
He kind of does a little startle, and then he turns and he looks at the decoy, and he turns around, and he just starts walking right on the edge of the public. So, and the wind is blowing, and the snow is falling hard, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, I'm following this deer. Like there was so much wind and so much like visual obstruction from the snow. I just got up and I started following this deer. And he's walking down the edge. I'm in that tall grass buffer, and I'm going right behind him, and he has no idea. I mean, he's 60 yards ahead of me, and I'm trying to like close the gap, right? And he ends up going, and I'm following right along. It was the oddest scenario. And he ends up going all the way, and then he just dips into the standing corn there, which I can't hunt. So that was the end of the hunt, but I was just like beside himself. Like I called all my buddies after. I was like, "You're not gonna believe this." So I was like, "Well, that was it. I'm sure that's probably it." So I go back out there, a couple more times. Sorry, cats caused ruckus. So I go out there a few more times. I do the same type of setup. I'm glass down open, nothing, no buck. So I'm like, okay, he's doing something different now. Mm-hmm. So I knew that sometimes he was bedded on the edge of that standing corner in that drainage. I couldn't hunt there. And I knew sometimes he would use the hedgerow. I've seen him go to the hedgerow. I've seen him come out of the hedgerow. And I can hunt the hedgerow. So it's a windy day. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go and I'm going to slip to that hedgerow. That hedgerow I know this hedgerow perfectly. So like the first half of it, there's never any deer bedded. Then it starts, there's some canopy opens up, and then all of a sudden there's some grass, some vegetation that grows pretty high. And then there's some trees that have fallen, and then there's just a big tangled mess down towards the end. And that's always where, if there's a buck in there, that's always where they're bedded. So I start slipping through there. It's windy, so I'm using the cover of the wind to kind of slip and close. So I'll often use wind or raining or certain conditions to like push the envelope a little bit. So this was the perfect situation for that. I didn't know if he was in there or not, but I was like, this is just I'm kind of taking a stab at it. So I'm working through that hedgerow. I'm glassing because I'm trying to sit, I want to see him if he's laying down. Just so I don't spook him or, I don't push him too far. Everything's clear. I keep going. I get about halfway through, it starts getting a little hairy in there, and I'm glassing, and I see an ear flicker about 30 yards up. And I'm glassing, and it's a doe. And I'm like, okay, this is a good situation. I'm going to set it right here. So I clear some debris. I get behind this big tree. I clear some debris, and I set up my saddle, and I just hang it. You just kind of like this, like feet on the ground, just behind the tree. And what I'm hoping is, they make a move, hopefully come down the hedgerow, and I can shoot them like that. But I didn't really know what was going to happen. I still don't know if that buck's in there. Well, I see that doe get up, and she comes out to the right, exits the hedgerow, and goes into that field that I can hunt. And that's a corn stubble field. It was harvested. She goes out there and she feeds around a little bit. And I'm like, okay. Then she goes back in. So I'm sitting there and I'm kind of glassing into the hedgerow. I'm just trying to see if anything happens, any other deer, and I don't see anything. And then I'll see a body going left or right. And I look, and then this deer trots out into the field. And it's that buck. And I'm like, oh my gosh. It's 120 yards ahead of me. He goes right out in the field, and he's nose to the ground looking. And I think he's looking for that doe. And I think he knew that she went out there, but I don't think he knew that she came back in. So he's out there and he's doing like circles. And he's not paying attention to anything. He's like nose to the ground looking for something. And I'm like, I quickly just unhook the saddle. That's one of the reasons I like hunting low from the saddle. Like I can unhook and go. So I unhook the saddle. I get right to the edge, and he gets in a corn row and starts coming down like paralleling me. And this ends up being a little bit longer shot, but like I mentioned earlier, like I'm confident in the right situation to make a longer shot. Whitetails are dumpy critters. I don't shoot them like I do some other animals out west. So I'm not like anything too extreme, but it was a little bit on the further range of my effective range or where I'm willing to shoot whitetails. But he's coming down the edge. I kind of boogie over to the side there, right where that hedgerow ends when that field starts, and I drop down to my knees so I can shoot under the browse line. And I'm ranging him. He's nose to the ground doing one of these, and I range him, set my dial, come for draw, and I have to make this loud run. I just make this burn to get him to stop, and he stops and he looks, and I shoot, and I see that arrow hits him hard. He like buckles, and then he turns and he runs back towards where he was bedded in the hedgerow. So, like dummy, I didn't give him enough time, and I know better than this, but I was like, I wanted to know. I wanted to see my arrow, and I wanted to see the sound.
Sure.
The blood.
Right.
To make the determination, do I go after this deer now? Do I give him all night? Do I give him 45 minutes? And I didn't think that he was going to be bedded right on the edge. I thought he went into the hedgerow, maybe even through it, but into that thick meat of the hedgerow, I didn't think he was going to be where he was. So I give it like 10, 15 minutes, and I go out into that field, and I find my arrow, and there's a lot of blood. And I'm like, okay, this looks pretty good. It didn't look like lung blood, though. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to just, I see it on the corn stalks, and I just start following it. And I'm like, I just want more evidence. before I can make the decision here. I'm totally fine backing out. And I take, I don't know, 5 or 6 steps, and I'm like, that's a lot of blood, but that's not the kind of blood I really want. And then all of a sudden I hear something, and I look up. He's bedded right on the edge of the hedgerow, facing out, watching me.
Mm-hmm.
He gets up and he takes off, and I'm like, oh my gosh, because on the other side of that hedgerow is the private ground that I'm not allowed to hunt. And then it's like 2 miles to the next patch of cover. And I'm like, he was moving pretty good, you know. I'm like, this thing. So I was really mad at myself. Went home, kind of stewed on it for a while. Got up the next morning, went, knocked on the door, and asked. I said, "Hey, I hit it up. Do you mind if I can track it? I can get one on your property." He said, "Yeah, no problem. Go for it. They're gun hunters. They don't care if they shoot at me." So I go into that hedgerow. I pick up blood in the field, follow really good blood trail, and I'm pretty colorblind, so I'm finding this, you know, easily. I get in there. I'm not finding any. I found where he laid down. No more beds. He gets through the hedgerow. I look out into the bean field, you know, the one bean field, and I don't see anything. The beans were harvested, no deer. And then remember, there was a cornfield. The corn was harvested. And I'm blasting from 300 yards away into the corn. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like I can see forever and I don't see him.
Sure.
And I'm like, you know, now I've got to go ask the next landowner. You know, I feel like the bum. So I walk down the edge. There's a little lane where I can still have permission, you know, between there and the ditch and then the cornfield. And I'm walking that to go to the next guy's house to ask. And I look over in the corn stubble and he's laying dead right there. So he had made it through the beans, down the ditch, up the ditch, into the corn stubble, probably 15 yards. Must have laid down. The coyotes had gotten to his hind end a little bit, but I don't know to the meat, but he was right there.
Wow.
But I ended up hitting him. It ended up hitting him a little forward. Like it wasn't like it was like right where the leg bone is, almost in front of the heart. But there must have been enough like vascularity there or whatever that's enough to kill him because there was a ton of blood. But it didn't kill him immediately. But I was just such a unique deer in a unique situation in the way I hunted him, just constantly on the move so I could keep tabs on him, keep eyes on him. And then just to have that whole hunt pan out, the shot, the uncertainty, you know, pretty much certain I wasn't going to find them. And then to end up getting them, I was happier than any deer I've ever shot, you know, when I found that buck. So
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah,
great looking buck. I love his character.
Yeah.
Those brow tines.
Yeah, they kind of angle straight back. He's got a little kicker point on the opposite side there.
Mm-hmm.
It's got pretty decent mass. Just cool deer.
Absolutely. All right, Andy, we're gonna keep it moving here. We got just a little over a half hour left here, and we got 2 more bucks to get through here.
Yep.
So we're gonna jump right in here to buck number 4.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this one.
Incredible.
He's a really cool deer. Obviously, he's got some great width. He's got some really incredible mass, and he's got really short tines, so he's a really unique looking buck.
Mm-hmm.
I did know about this buck the year prior, and he was cool. He was probably, I don't know, maybe like 100, if I had to guess, like 135-inch 10. I actually took a stab at him the year before. So I'll lay this out. There's a piece of ground that anyone can hunt. It's not considered public land, but it's open to public hunting. It has a small little ridge with some oaks and stuff on it. Then it has this drainage. And in that drainage, there's always some does bedded in there. It gets a fair amount of pressure, so I don't typically see mature bucks bedded in there. but there's always does. So I've hunted this area for years. Between that little oak ridge and that drainage, it narrows down into a little funnel. Like you see that on a map, you're like, that's a pinch point right there. Like that is a killer pinch point. So, but everybody else sees that too. And
Yeah.
so I knew this deer pretty much. If there's a good deer in this area, he's bedded on this piece of private ground that's adjacent to it. The guy's got a phenomenal property. He runs feeders, he's got food plots and everything else. And it's just got great cover. So if there's one in this section, it's usually always coming from or going to that guy. He's got a phenomenal funnel leading off of that. And I've actually killed a deer in that funnel. I killed a nice, like, open young sized deer back in 2008. So I took a stab at this deer and I was like, I'm gonna hunt him and I'm gonna hunt on this in this funnel. So ideally, this funnel runs east and west. Ideally, we'd have a north wind or a south wind so I can blow out in the open. So this particular day, it was blowing out of the south. So I put it on the north side of the funnel. In the funnel, there's all kinds of trails coming through. There's sign there. It's got everything you want. It does get some attention from other guys. But I always felt like, I'm willing to hunt all day, or I'm willing, hunt more, or I'm willing to, play the wind smarter. So I always felt like I had a leg up on guys.
Mhm.
But this buck ended up doing something I wasn't anticipating. He came out of that piece of private ground, but what he did was he came out behind me. He went straight out into the open, and then he paralleled that whole funnel, that whole drainage downwind. It was a south wind. He came out on the north side, way out in the open where he was safe, and he paralleled. So essentially what he did is he got himself out in the open where he could use his eyes and his nose. He smelled me. He ended up smelling all the deer that were in there and all the other hunters that were out there hunting that day. And I was like, okay, this deer, he knows he knows the drill. But that gave me a little intel on that buck and what he does. So I watched him. He came down, he ended up getting me, he ended up getting my win. And he kind of took off out in the open, turned back, and ended up in that drainage way down there. So I was like, I'm going to target this buck next year. I never ended up seeing him again. I got some pictures of him late season, so I knew he made it. But I just felt like that was my chance, like he was living on a piece of private ground. Guys were hunting this. It was ramping up the pressure and everything. So I just kind of took the stab, and he won. I wasn't like dead set on the deer anyway because he was a nice deer, but not a great deer. And so that off season, I go back and I scout, and I'm like, okay, how do I hunt this deer when if he's gonna use the opening to the open ground to get to that drainage? Okay, there's got to be. I either got two options. I can hunt from the open ground if there's cover, like literally like on the ground, maybe try to get under an undulation or something, but there just wasn't enough there where I felt comfortable. Or I hunt along the edge to where maybe he gets close enough and I can have a shot out into the opening before he gets down in. So I found this one spot. It's just it would be to the west of that funnel where the woods kind of bumps out a little bit. It just gives me a little more, it gains me a little more yardage out to where this deer had walked. So I was like, I'm gonna set up right on that edge. And maybe I'll have a shot at like 40 yards. Again, which is longer than I want to shoot. I feel comfortable shooting that, but whitetails, especially at that yardage, that's a dangerous yardage. So I end up waiting because this is a rut buck. He does not come over. He's not in their early season. I learned from past trail camera data in that drainage. Like he starts showing up there a little bit at night in October, late October. Might get a daylight picture of them. Then you start getting into like November 5th, 6th, 7th, 12th, in there. Now you're starting to get some big movements at him, and that's when I wanted to slip in there. I wanted the timing to be precise. So I took a midday. I went out and scouted, and what I did was I stayed out of the drainage. I didn't want to bump the does. I stayed out of that funnel because I'm not even going to mess with it. I just walked that field, and I ended up cutting this trap. So I have a route where he's going through this field, and I'm like, okay, I can kind of follow this, and I can see if he passes by the edge at some point where I could possibly get a shot. And it ended up being kind of, you know, a long shot, like in that 40, 45 yard range where he's out in the open where he thinks he feels safe, but he's still maybe like on far range of where I could shoot. So I was like, this is my only chance. Like I'm gonna give it a shot. So I wait for the wind. I wait for the day that I could get out there. I don't remember how it exactly panned out, but I remember I couldn't hunt that day when we first found that. But anyway, I waited for the conditions to be, pretty good, cool temperatures. I'm going to go in there and take a stab. I hang a stand. I get really high because I'm like, maybe if I get extra high, maybe my wind will miss him. So I'm trying to do everything I can in my abilities to hopefully, if he does this, that the hunt will pan out in my favor. But I know it's risky. So I'm sitting there. I'm actually like this way. If I'm looking away from the open, there's cover there, and there's potential, that deer can come through there as well. So I'm kind of like focusing my attention back to where he might come, focusing here. I just keep turning every so often, and I'm looking forward for a while, and then all of a sudden I start turning my head, and out of the corner of my eye, I catch movement out in the field, and I look, and that buck, I don't have my bow in my hand or anything. And that buck is traveling right down that same general path, out in the open, down the wind and everything. So my wind is basically blowing straight, it's from the south, straight north. I see him, and he's 15, 20 yards from getting into my scent stream. So out of instinct, I just go burr, just to get him to stop before he hits my scent stream. And he just locks up. And I'm like, oh my God, I still don't have my bow in my hand. I'm like this. I grab my bow. I got my rangefinder. I always have it right here on my chest. I range. He's at 41 yards. So I pull my bow down. I'm just moving slow. I'm like, just stay smooth so you don't see anything. Put my release on. Slowly draw. He's still there. Slowly draw. Put my 40-yard pin on him. Release. And I stopped hitting him. Now, he did react on the shot because he was alert. Probably should have adjusted my aim a little bit, but I ended up hitting them back. So a lot of times whitetails will drop, and then a lot of times they'll whirl. So what he did is he kind of like brought his back end, his guts and stuff kind of into my barrel. Anyway, I end up hitting him back. He takes off, and I hear him go into, he kind of goes up towards that funnel. He dips into the cover, and then I hear some water. I know where the water is. I have a buddy that's down that area with a tracking dog, and I said, "Hey, can you meet me in the morning? I think I got shot a buck." And so he comes out there, he meets me in the morning, and the dog gets on the track, and we start following it. And I'm prepared. I already got this guy's number, if he's going to cross the property line. But anyway, we get right on the track. That dog is following it. We start getting into some water, and then we look up ahead, and there's his. He's like, I see his rack sticking out of the water. It was the coolest thing. His rack was caught in like a tree, and like his face and the side of his rack was out of the water, and everything else was submerged.
Wow.
And it was just an awesome buck, really unique deer, cool gun, and he was just so smart and just taught me a lot about this open country, how when there's limited cover and the pressure is in the cover, they'll use the open for safety. And I'm starting to see that more and more in some of these areas. I've seen that in Kansas quite a bit. Especially if it's high pressure, open country, they learn quickly where that pressure is. And then it's like, where's the safety? When all the crops
Yeah.
are down, there's no corn, where's the safety? They're either going to go to some place where is lightly hunted or there's no hunting, or they're going to use that open ground. And you like, I'll often see them out there. I'll see like a buck and a doe bedded out in the open, or I'll see these deer out in the middle of this open area when like there's miles from the next cover. And I'm like, why are they out there? You know? And it's just like they're starting to use that for safety. And like the equalizer is gun season. But during bow season, I think they feel pretty comfortable out there.
Sure. Yeah, that's I appreciate the fact that with each one of these stories here at the end you're adding in that one thing that you took away in terms of something that you learned from that hunt. And I think that's an important thing to recognize that in a successful hunt or an unsuccessful. You know, what are you learning? What's the takeaway there? So
Yeah.
appreciate that.
I think that's why some of these deer are so special to me, because they did teach me, you know, they all felt in their own way that it like was unlikely that I was going to kill them, you know. So the fact that I did, and I felt like they were better than me, and they were doing what they were supposed to do. I just did something or thought about it in a certain way after I was beaten by them once and twice
Sure.
to finally get them. So I think that's why they're special.
Is that a really dark coat on him, or is that because he got into the mud and water?
He has kind of a dark coat, but yeah, he's pretty he's pretty so yeah. Yeah.
All right, Andy, are you ready to move on to our final
Yep.
buck here, buck number 5?
Sure.
So you guys thought that last one was a wide load. I'm gonna get a load of this one.
Yeah, he's cool. He's my widest buck.
Somebody had asked about the one that's over your right shoulder on the wall there. Is that the previous? Yeah, that one.
Yeah, that's him. Yeah. He's an awesome deer. So I'll make this one quick. It's just a rather long story, but I knew about this deer. I killed him on the 3rd year of knowing about it. So the first year, I set a camera up on this apple tree that was held apples. It doesn't hold apples every year, but I thought this might be a good location to get some summer inventory. So I set it up there. One of the first pictures I get is this deer, and this is Michigan. It's a 135-inch. I think he might have been a clean 8, maybe 9. Can't remember. But he was wide. He was impressive. It was like, you know, that's usually a lot of years. That's like the biggest buck I have is like 130. It just depends. Like sometimes we get bigger ones, but I've had plenty of years where the biggest, oldest buck I could find was a 130. But I was like, man, that's cool. But he did look like a 3-year-old. He looked just like a phenomenal 3-year-old. So I was like, yeah, I would shoot him. But if there's an older deer, even if he's smaller, I'd rather hunt that. But, you know, it was the best buck I had. And I figured I would put in some time. So I ended up glassing him a few times in the summer. Figured out he was bedded on this piece of ground that had a river bottom running through it. So I was like, okay, you know, I was familiar with this ground, but so often bed along the river. I knew this property really well. I hunted it quite a bit. I actually never killed a deer on it. But I hunted throughout the year, like early season, never saw him, never got another picture of him. Moved some cameras around, kind of poked around there when the wind was in my favor, where I thought maybe he was there. Never any sign of him, and just lost track of him. So what I did was I just put some cameras out. I put them on some scrapes, kept one on that apple tree. There were some scrapes under that. Put one in a funnel, like along that river, and just let them soak. Just basically forgot about the deer. So I go and hunt some other deer, pull those cameras at the end of the year, and I see that he was in during the rut. And I was like, oh, okay. So nothing. October 1st, we opened, nothing. Right around that 3rd week of October, I started getting pictures of them on that scrape. Where I had those that camera, those scrapes, quite a few pictures over like a 5-6 day window. So I was like, okay, that's good to know. Like I've used that timing a lot to kill some other bucks when I start to know when they're in an area. So next year, he's got all my attention. You know, there was a guy that gun hunted out there, and he said he missed a big wide one, and that was later, late November around Thanksgiving or something. So I had hopes that he had made it. The next year, I put the camera on the apple tree. It didn't have apples, but I made a little knot scrape under there. Didn't get a picture of him. Glassed him all summer. Never saw him. So I'm thinking he's dead. But I placed cameras out there just like I did the year before, just in case he showed up. And then I told you about one of the previous bucks where I didn't hunt him in that opening because of the swirling wind. Well, where those scrapes were, there were some oak trees there. It's the same type of scenario. There was this little opening in the timber, and it's great. I mean, it's got river bottom on the north side. Then there's timber. Then there's this opening. Then there's woods behind you, and then there's ag field. So natural movement from the river, you know, through this little oak patch, lay down some scrapes on their way to food. I mean, it's got everything you want. So I placed the cameras in there, and I'm like, if he shows up, this is probably where I'm going to hunt him. So I go in there mid-October, check the cameras, nothing. Wait like 10 days. I go in there. As I'm going in, I cut a trap on the field edge that looked like a good trap. And I'm like, oh, there's a big deer down there. I go in there, slip in there, pull the car up, and he's in there. So I'm like, okay, this buck is back. And he was probably 150 inches maybe, big for Michigan. So I'm like, all right, I got to get this. You know, I can hunt this deer. So I'm like, I'm gonna hunt him in this opening. It's where the sign is. Everything is telling me to hunt him here. I know if he's in here, he's bedded along that river. That's where they bed. So I set up there, and I ended up hunting this deer there 3 or 4 times, and at least twice I got wind coming out of the north from the river, from the bedding, in my face, blowing out towards the food, or some variants of that. And he would be coming from the north, and he would catch my wind. And I'm like, I never laid eyes on him, but you just know when you hear a big mature buck snort and you hear him bound off, you hear that weight of him, or you hear the antlers crashing. You just know. And I just knew that deer busted me. And I'm like, I'm throwing milkweed, and I'm like, wow. You know, it's like, it doesn't make any sense. And then I would throw it, you know, then I'd throw it up a little higher. Then all of a sudden it's kind of blowing back towards where he came. And I'm like, what's going on? You know? And then I start to figure it out. I'm like, that wind is coming over the top. I had never experienced that before. I had heard people talk about it, but I just never been in that scenario. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I can't hunt up here, I think. But I tried it again. I thought maybe it was a fluke. Maybe it was a wind switch, not a swerve. You know, because often you're out there and it's like winds shift all the time.
Oh, yeah.
So I go out there and I sit there again. Same thing. I hear a deer blowing in there. Sounds like a big deer. I'm like, oh my God. You know, like the wind's not shifting. Like it's storming here. So I end up giving it up. I tried hunting a few other spots. I never see him. Now we're into like December. No pictures, nothing. He's gone. He knows I'm in there. And it's just over with. So now we're in the 3rd year. Now I'm like, okay, if this deer makes it, we got to try something different. So what I did is I went in the off season and I scouted, and I'm like, okay, where can I hunt this deer and get a consistent win? I know where he's bedding. I know where he's feeding. I know he's in here at a certain time. I just got to be undetected, right? I can't hunt where the sign was. That was a hard thing to do, is to leave the sign and hunt where I thought I could get a consistent win. So I ended up backing off, believe it or not, getting further from the bedding towards the food source. In fact, I was not far from the food source at all. I wasn't on the edge, but I was in the cover. right where that ring bottom kind of comes at an angle and it creates the inside corner of that food source. So I back off there just because I'm testing a milkweed and I can get a consistent wind. So I wait until I remember it was October 24th. We were supposed to get a cold front. And the pictures that I had gotten of him the year prior were October 24th and then October 21st, the very first pictures. So I looked at October 24th, cold front hits, but it's high winds. October 25th is still cold, calm winds. So I choose to wait. I go in October 25th. So I go in there. Still don't know if I have pictures of him or if he's in or not. I'm going strictly by the timing from the year before and my scouting from previous year. I'm walking down the field edge, so this is kind of how I enter that property. And I get back a ways off the road and I start hitting scrape, another scrape, another scrape. It gets torn like all along this edge. And I'm cutting some pretty decent tracks. And I'm like, okay, there's a big buck here. I think this is I think he's in there. In fact, I hunted somewhere else that morning and I was filming and I was talking to the camera and I was like, this might be the day I killed the widest buck of my life. Just because I knew the day and I knew the weather and I knew the time and everything lined up. So anyway, I get to that
just real
corner,
quick, Andy.
I dip in. I already had a tree that I had picked out. I get set up, and I'm checking the wind and it's good, man. It's like blowing me kind of out towards the field.
Yeah.
And I'm focused that way. This is November. Gosh, what was it? It was like November 5th or 6th or 7th. 7th. That's what it was. It's November 7th. So I'm sitting there and focused that way where I think he's bedded. Oh, no. I'm sorry. It's not November 7th. It's October 25th. It's October 25th. That's the day. So I'm focused over in that river bottom, and I'm thinking he's going to come out bedding, headed towards there. And all of a sudden, I just kind of look out in the field, and out in the field, there's this point that comes out. And I see a doe stand up at the point. I was like, oh, there's a deer. So I'm looking, and she kind of comes out into the field. And then all of a sudden, she comes out and feeds, and then she goes back in, and kind of coming towards me. So I'm glassing, and then I see another deer stand up. And I'm like, oh, this looks like a big deer. Like his head was in the branches. And all of a sudden, he comes out into the field, and it's this big wide rack. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like he's complete opposite direction. He's out in that field. He came off that point. They were bedded on that point. He follows her back into the cover, and they're coming towards me now from the opposite direction inside the cover. My wind is blowing out into the field that they just came out of, and now they're in the cover working right towards that inside corner where I'm sitting. So he kind of headed back towards the bedding where he had bedded previous. So anyway, he's coming, and I'm like looking through the timber, and I can see his rack every so often working his way, and he's going to come right on a trail that's at like 25 yards. So I see him coming, and I know the shot's going to happen. So I come to full draw, and I'm just following him and waiting. That doe passes through, he passes through, and I give him a little nerf to stop him, and end up shooting him. I hear him run out. He runs down the hill, gets into that river bottom, and I hear a big crash down here in the water. But just an awesome deer. Yes, the timing of that. And really getting to know him over those years is the key to that hunt. And the fact that he was just in there for such a short window, it had to be like that. And I felt like I had to be in that spot to kill him. And it took me 3 years to figure that out. And that's when I was like, I felt like I was still a pretty decent hunter then, but it wasn't that long ago. But he he had my number. He really did.
Real quick here, we've had a slew of questions, and we don't have time to get through all of them here, but just a couple here that I want to bring up. Racer Dave asks, what's your draw weight, length, and arrow setup is? Weight, spine, head weight, curious about what works for those distance shots, like in buck number 4.
Mm. So I'm a little unorthodox. I have 3 bows all set up with different
Okay.
setups. So on that buck he's talking about, I used a day 6, which is a phenomenal arrow. They make great arrows. It's on the heavier side. It's a 530 grain arrow, 50 grain insert copper, and then I used a 7 1.5 broadhead. So that one came in at 530 grains. That's on the heavier side. I don't run that arrow when I hunt out west, but I do hunt that. I do use that for whitetail often. I like that arrow for whitetail. I'm just under a 30-inch draw, and I shoot 70 pounds. And like when I hunt out west, I use something more than 440 range, and sometimes I'll hunt whitetail with that too. It's a little flatter trajectory, a little more forgiving. Up and down, like range forgiveness. And it suits me better well out west. It's not much of an arcing shot. But for whitetail, I like that D6 arrow quite a bit.
Okay. We got another question here from Steve. Andy, do you get eyes on all of your deer before you go in to set up and hunt them? Like, I'm assuming he means, are you familiar with that buck in that area, or?
Yeah. In Michigan, I would say typically, but not always, because this is my home ground. I'm usually scouting to find bucks to go after. I try to locate, 3 to 4 bucks to focus on. But a lot of my deer, and a lot of my hunting is out of state, and I don't run any cameras out of state, so I don't know at all what's out there. Sometimes I'll see them, like I might get a visual and then move in. It just depends. Like a lot of times when I'm out of state, no, not so much. But in Michigan, maybe northern Ohio a little bit, like areas that I frequent and I can scout on. Yeah, I'm usually zeroing in on a particular buck. Not always.
Okay. I think we got time here for one more, and this is from Riley. He says, Andy, what's one thing new hunters can do to hunt more efficiently, in your opinion?
Hunt more efficiently. I think if I ever am hunting efficiently, it has to do more with my scouting. Like I put more of an emphasis on scouting than hunting, even during the season. I've talked about my job and my limitations in actually hunting time, but that doesn't mean I still can't scout. Like maybe I can't hunt from 3 till dark, but I might be able to get out of work and scout for 2 hours and then be at the Dodgers game, home for dinner or whatever. So I scout way more than I hunt, and that leads to more effective sits. Mm-hmm. I'm fine with that. I wish I could hunt more, and I do hunt. I do hunt, but I often scouting. I like to feel confident if I'm gonna sit somewhere. If I'm at home, I don't want to just go sit in an area where it could happen, or there was a buck there, or I found the bed there in the off season. I like to know that either through a trail cam picture, a visual, or signing, that something is in there that I potentially want to kill. And when I've kind of changed that mindset to gathering that information and then hunting when I have that, I think my success goes up in a short amount of time actually sitting in the tree, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Andy, when I hear that question and I think of you, I think more of a well-balanced hunter. I think one of the things you got going, and maybe I see it more than you do, but is that you take every aspect serious. Where I think if I'm going to take something from you, the biggest thing I can take is that you're spending enough time working physically. You're spending enough time practicing efficiently, and you're spending an amount of time scouting that you're finding the animals to go after. Does that describe it a little better?
Yeah, I yeah, it does. I think it does. Not that I think I'm like really good at any particular thing, but I do feel like I'm fairly versatile, and that's by design. Like you know, I've chosen to hunt various areas, states, different types of terrain because I didn't know how to hunt them. I hadn't had those experiences, and I felt like if I want to be the best hunter I can be, I need to learn how to hunt deer in multiple different types of terrain, different types of pressure, different scenarios. And then also, like I've learned a lot from you, Dan, and hunting beds, and I've learned a lot from my buddy Jesse, who is really good at early season, and that. And I've learned a lot from like Jared Scheffler hunting on the ground, and I see all these guys that are super successful with different styles, and it's like, okay, I want to take a little bit of all of that so I can do it all when the time is right. And that's when people ask me my style, like I don't even have an answer because it just like these stories, you can tell it varies hunt to hunt. Um, but I like that. I like being versatile because I feel like if you put me in a situation, any situation, I can come up with a game plan that I'm confident in. I may not be successful, but I'm confident in just about any type of tactic or situation.
Sure.
All right, I think we have time for one more if you're game for that, Andy.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Tim asks, over the past several years, I have been successful using the beast tactics, but they are 2.5 and 3.5-year-old bucks. Is there something I should do different to get to the next age class of bucks? Dan, I think you have an opinion on this too. So,
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I've killed a lot of 2 and 3-year-old deer, in the past, and
sure.
it's there's nothing wrong with that, and you got to get good at killing. But when you're trying to take a step up to that next level, it's like I put more of an emphasis on searching for that caliber of deer, and the more I do that, the more I find out that they're vetted and they behave different than those 2 and 3-year-old deer usually. So you kind of have to. I don't want to say forget what you know, because I've killed some old deer that do things that I've seen young deer do. But it seems like on average, the older, more mature bucks, they just behave different. They don't make those same mistakes. Like a lot of these deer that I talked about today, how they're using things to their advantage, where they almost have every advantage. And in some cases, they have every advantage, and you can't even beat them. There's no way to beat them. You just have to find that one thing where they're vulnerable, that one chink, and try to capitalize on that. And it's really hard. But yeah, I focus more on. I didn't really change over the years. Like I used to kill a lot of 2-year-olds, and I kill a lot of 3-year-olds, and now I try to shoot, some older bucks. I just put more effort into finding those deer just around home, and you got to weed through more. But I've just learned over time of like where to look. It's those more secure areas where they're surviving, where there's good security cover, where it's difficult to get into, where they can keep tabs on people coming and going, where they can smell, where they can hear. It really depends on the type of terrain you're in. But it almost feels like when you find a spot or a bend or an area where you think a big buck's living and you can't figure out how to hunt them, like that's probably a mature buck. And I still find that I'm still like, I don't even know how to hunt this deer. Like he's got everything in his favor. So when you find that, it's often you might have to wait for a certain condition to hunt. You might have to wait for a rain, or a wind, or you know, or something that will just give you a little bit of an advantage where you can slip in a little closer or get in undetected or like a midday wind shift or something. But yeah, it's hard. It's a hard transition. And when I go out of state, I've had luck with older deer, but I'm sure I've killed plenty of like 3-year-old deer out there too. It's like I don't know the age of those deer. Um, so yeah, it's a tough transition. You got to be willing to pass deer. You got to be willing to search. Spread a wider net, try and find those bigger bucks. That's one thing in Michigan that I've noticed. Like I have to spread my net across 4 counties to find maybe 2 or 3 shooters.
Sure.
Something that I want to chase that has age, or maybe a rack size that I want to pursue. And if I don't spread that, if I limit myself to one piece of public ground or maybe a county, I'm not going to find it. So that's kind of the way I think about that.
Good answer.
Yeah, he hit on just about everything I would say too. My emphasis would be kind of the same direction of his, as in, you got to remember there is not going to be a trophy buck or a 5-6-year-old buck on every public property. There just isn't. And if you get locked to a property, you're probably not going to kill those bucks on a regular basis.
Yeah.
You have to go find them to hunt them. And if you notice, guys that are successful, like Andy is, or myself, we're usually hunting the buck we kill. Where other guys seem to be more lucky, they're just killing deer. And another thing is when you are on a property, even if you're using the beast methods and you're listening to it as gospel, you still got to look at it as the oldest bucks will have some niche where they found some way of surviving that nobody else has caught on to. And you got to figure that niche out. And I think that's a big part of it.
Awesome. Well, good answers, guys. With that, we are coming up on the 2-hour mark. So we're going to wrap this up. Andy, we want to thank you for taking the time tonight. 2 hours of your time, as a matter of fact.
Yeah,
with
that flew
us.
by. That was fun reliving those hunts, but I appreciate you guys having me. That was a cool podcast.
Yeah, thanks for joining us tonight.
It was
Dan,
fun for me all listening. It was a great hunt.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we hope to have you on again at some point down the road here. So good luck this season, and we'll talk again soon. For everybody else, thanks again for tuning in to another episode of the Hunting Beast Report. We'll see you again next week, Tuesday. Enjoy your 4th of July.
Thanks, everybody.